Hi all, let's have a look at another exciting game from the FIDE Grand Prix being played in Khanty-Mansiysk in Russia. This was on the 17th of May 2015. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave playing Fabiano Caruana in round 4. D4 from Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, also known as MVL for short. Knight F6, C4, and we have E6, as though a Nimzo engine would result if Knight C3, but Knight F3 is often used, Queen's Indian type territory. D5. Now after Knight C3 we're actually going into a Rogozin system, Bishop B4, so it's like a cross between a Queen's Gambit declined and a Nimzo Indian. White now plays C takes D5, this is one of the more common moves. E takes, Bishop G5, Knight Bd7, Rook C1, C6. These are common opening moves in the Rogozin system. White is often here playing A3, funny enough though. 91 games in live but with A3. For example, let's have a quick example like this. And you see that black isn't being a nuisance with that C3 knight. In the game continuation, A3 isn't played. In fact, E3, this is 41 games in live, but there's a slight difference here. Black's going to be a nuisance now with Queen A5. It seems that, for example, now A3 is not going to be so hot because black can just take on C3, and if Rook takes, then we can play Knight E4, and this is getting to be a right nuisance, trying to win the exchange here. If B4 Knight takes, we're hitting the Queen. So yes, that's really quite discouraging now for A3. And there's also, of course, threatening Queen takes A2 now, using the pin, cheeky, and also Knight E4 putting more pressure on C3. So perhaps you could say unusually for a certain black opening system, black is directly creating a concrete tactical threat here quite early on as move 8 now with Queen A5. Bishop D3 is played, and Knight E4 now, exerting more pressure on C3, and also looking at taking the bishop. White castled, accepting the loss of the bishop pair. Knight takes, but here black has to be very careful. He plays Knight F6 because H7 is attacked, he can't castle. Queen C2, and again he can't castle routinely, H7 is a problem. He kicks the knight, creating a weakness here, you could argue. Knight F3, and now Bishop D6, trying to discourage perhaps Knight E5. White has a temptation here to play this position, it seems now, like a reverse Dutch stone wall. Instead of having a blocked in bishop on C1, maybe White can play like a caveman, Knight E5 and F4 later, and spearhead an attack, maybe even later G4, G5, Queen G2. It's a basic instinct maybe to attack in all of us, and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave perhaps considers here that maybe it's worth going with the basic instinct of this basic, aggressive looking attacking scheme. What could possibly go wrong against Fabiano Caruana with such a scheme? So Knight E5 was played with this view, it seems, of now playing F4, but Knight G4 interrupts this little plan. F4 here would be a disaster. If F4, not Knight takes E3, because then there will be Queen E2 and the black king still in the center, but Bishop takes E3 first is a disaster after Knight takes, winning the exchange. Queen F2, we just take the Rook on F1. So it's temporarily putting this aggressive plan on hold. White goes back with the Knight, and the Knight goes back as though saying, okay, do you want to draw? I mean, I'm playing with the black pieces, I can play for a win with White tomorrow. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave basically says, no way. H3. Now black castles, and now Knight E5, back to this aggressive caveman plan in some respects. What could possibly go wrong with it? Well, as we saw recently on the channel, there was a classic Fischer game on the lead up in the candidates against Tigran Petrosian, where Petrosian also was tempted by the default position of the Rook to play for an F4, F5, and the classic remedy and antidote to this whole plan is essentially this diagonal, basically to try and cause turbulence with white's center with this diagonal and d4 in particular. And it seems as though Fabiano Caruana is making preparation now for this plan with this move a6. He's stabilizing the b5 square, which currently is protected by c6, but the c6 pawn needs to move here to put pressure on d4. So it does seem as though Fabiano Caruana is going to use this classic antidote to this aggressive f4 plan. Does white really want to commit to this? Maybe there were some other ways of playing the position, but on the other hand, he has given black the bishop pair, which is traditionally seen as a small advantage in most positions as a rough generalization. So it seems as though maybe there's also an attraction in using this entrenched knight on e5. I think it was Tartko that once said the knight on e5 can let an attack play itself. Well, how true is this? White does play this aggressive looking f4. So clearly, very aggressive, intense. It creates ideas maybe like this, or even like this. So let's see. The classic antidote though is used. c5, hitting d4. And now, yes, this looks like a logical follow-up. If A, then B, then C, white now plays g4. And it looks as though queen g2 and g5 is a pretty aggressive attempt to win this game, and at the moment it doesn't seem as though white's center is in any great trouble, or this diagonal in particular. In fact, though, black does take on d4 now, which does weaken the diagonal a little bit, and you could argue, well, should he have maintained the tension? But no, now he just calmly strengthens his d5, even though it might risk a tempo gaining attacking move, seemingly good attacking move. He plays actually bishop e6. Caruana is saying, you know, come and get me with tempo if you want, with f5 at some point. But there are various instances where f5 is just reacted to with bishop takes e5. And maybe then the bishop just retreating. At the moment the queen's holding d5 as well. Queen b3 is played here. So looking at b7, it looks like ominous, like f5 might actually be useful for putting pressure on d5 here. We see b5. So is this over provocation? b5 also has a great advantage to it though. It means the queen can come to b6 as a new resource in the position, shielded by that b5 pawn to put pressure on this diagonal, which, as I say, you know, Fischer's established this idea clearly in a classic game against Petrosian in the 1971 candidates match, where Petrosian went for him with the f pawn and this queen b6 antidote was used. We seem to be seeing a repeat. So f5 going for black, and now queen b6. Yes, tactically this is very nice to get exposure, to get the white king exposed here tactically. You might have wondered, hold on a sec, well, isn't this is really quite committal for white, but isn't he got a space advantage? Well, you can see though now after knight f3 that although yes, you could argue this is aggressive, but they're a bit locked down. It's not as if g5 is going to be a killer move just yet. It's lost the ability for the queen to support it as well. The queen's over here now. So bishop c8 is calmly played as a potential positional pawn sacrifice as well. White dare not take this, surely, in this position. Surely he's got too many weaknesses around his king. Let's just test this theory. White actually played king g2. If knight takes d5, knight takes, queen takes, yes, black is a pawn down. But look at the bishops. Bishop b7. They're absolutely fantastic in this position. White's king safety is surely shot to pieces here after rook a e8. Numerous threats. Bishop f4 to e3. Rook e3 pinning the bishop to the queen, maybe doubling, taking control of the e file. It looks horrible. For example, like this would be a disaster. As an example, queen takes d4, white center crumbling, queen e5, and it looks as though these dark squares are ready for black to start digging his teeth into, with no resistance here, with all the pawns on knight squares. That's just a vivid example. that this pawn on d5 cannot be taken, it seems. We see king g2 and now bishop b7, strengthening d5, and also maybe knight e4 is going to come soon. Knight e4, but now actually knight a4 is played. The queen can use the a7 square to keep pressure on c5. We see knight c5. Is this a problem for black? He just puts pressure on that knight. It can't easily be supported with b4 in this position. The queen's blocking the b pawn. Unfortunate. He doesn't really want to lose that knight. Black would really get an iron grip on the e4 square if the queen replaced the bishop on b7. Maybe knight e4 coming up later. We see a4 instead. Seems to be quite logical. But does black have to play ball here and take this pawn at some point? Black takes on c5 now, and we see d takes c5. So a very interesting position here is emerging. D takes c5. So is this a positional sacrifice from white to get a blockade on d4 later? Well, white doesn't allow any possibility of a future blockade on d4, which would hem in his bishop. He uses this moment for a very liberating move for this bishop on b7. It is, after all, potentially eyeing the king as great bonus points that the king is on g2 here. Can you guess? Well, I've given a few clues, but what does black play here if I give you 5 seconds? d4, offering a pawn here, but this is a fantastic bishop. Even though black hasn't got the bishop here, this is still looking really impressive. The knight can also join the party with knight d5 to e3 soon. White does take on b5, queen takes, and now black blockades the c pawn, queen b6, and black keeps the queens on with queen d7. And it's as though there's ideas like knight d5 to e3 on the cards now. The king tries to get out of the way. Black seems to have fantastic compensation for being a pawn down. Has white simply just created weaknesses instead of trying to, instead of achieving an attacking position? It seems he's handed black an attacking position at the cost of a pawn with lots of liabilities around his king. Has white given into some basic instincts here earlier to play for this kind of reversed Dutch stone wall without the bad bishop? Rook fe8. Now a pair of rooks come off here. This is after takes, knight takes, but rook e8. Black still seems to have a very dangerous position. This battery possibility looks particularly dangerous. For example, knight g2. Actually, queen d5 is not used here. Maybe rook f2 and black is guarding the entry point if queen d5. Possibly. Knight d5 instead, trying to establish maybe a very dangerous pawn, if nothing else, on e3. Queen b3, knight e3. This happens. Knight takes, d takes, a very dangerous pawn. And it seems the dart squares are vulnerable to queen c7, queen g3, or even queen d4, e2. These dart squares seem ominously weak here in this position. Queen c4. And in fact, queen c7 now, a very direct threat of mating. Queen f4. Unfortunately, this does suffer from a snag. It loses a piece, this defense. Queen takes, rook takes, e2, winning a piece. Yes, it seems Fabiano Caruana has used the classic recipe and supercharged it with a pawn sacrifice to get this position where he's forcibly now winning a piece. There was no attack from white in this game, and it seems black, at the cost of a pawn, was given great attacking potential, so much so it's now just cost white a piece. Bishop takes, rook b4, check, and here after rook c2, yes, it looks as though this pawn is a bit vulnerable, not going anywhere. These two connected passed pawns in theory are not going to happen. And here Maxime Vachier-Lagrave resigned. So it seems Fabiano Caruana, from a seemingly passive position, maybe was saying, come and get me. create some weaknesses, use the default rook on f1, play this f4 business. But the classic recipe still seems to be as effective as it was back in the Fischer era. The classic game Petrosian Fischer, which I might link to in this video, you can see the same template antidote to this kind of aggressive plan. You have to be prepared to turn the tables dynamically to keep your pieces liberated, to try and pounce on the weaknesses that white is creating. If you can play energetically, the rewards are gigantic in this kind of counter strategy to white committing to such an attack. I hope you enjoyed this video. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.